All right, I think we're starting up now. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another On the Contrary. We're going to be taking you through the Week 3 NFL slate and beyond, giving some of our differing viewpoints, our contrarian viewpoints, to hopefully differentiate some lineups for you in this week. I'm Chris Spags, joined once again by the top DFS player in the world, Alex Baker, better known to you guys as Osimo. Alex, how are you doing this week?
What's up, guys? I'm stoked for week 3. I feel like this is the week where my data has finally reached the point where I'm going to take over. My algorithm actually projects me to win more than $1 million this week, so it'll be a good one.
That's good. It can't get any better than that, I'm sure. And there'll be a trickle down effect for all of our payroll as well, I'm hoping. And of course, we are joined again by the Roto World senior editor, one of the best minds in football, and the writer of one of the Bibles, again, of the industry, the matchups column on rotoworld.com right now, Mr. Evan Silva. Evan, how are you doing?
Doing really, really well. I want Osimo to tweet out that his algorithm projects him to win $1 million this week.
I think that once the guy says it, you can take it to the bank. That's what we bank on here every single week.
Yeah, if I don't win a million, it's gonna be like a lost week for me.
One thing to note, because we are talking a lot about ownership projections throughout this video, you get a free week trial if you go to osmo.com now. Use promo code contrary. All of Osmo's rankings, all of our ownership projections, premium content as well will be available for you. So that's 1 week free with promo code contrary. But again, the main thing we're talking about and kind of jumping off with a lot of our views today is going to be the ownership projections. So go check that out. Before we get into the slate, though, one thing I did want to touch on, Evan, was a little bit of a controversy that you found yourself somewhat in the middle of this week, where there were local beat writers, in particular, the Cowboys beat writer Clarence Hill and the Dolphins beat writer Omar Kelly, kind of dug their heels in about the fantasy community. I think it was Clarence Hill who started saying that he hates fantasy, and Omar Kelly followed up with a slam dunk saying that the dumbest generation of football fans exists now because of fantasy football. It's sort of tough words from guys who are in an industry where a lot of the clicks coming are from players like folks watching this stream, the folks ingesting our content. So I guess, how do you feel like when you see the beat writers coming after the sport that you've made your bones in, Evan, and just speaking so disparagingly about the knowledge base?
I mean, I just kind of feel bad for them, honestly. Like they just, they're like lashing out almost, and I think that fantasy football analysis has really like made people smarter. It's brought a lot of people together that wouldn't normally have been in the same community. It's created jobs. Um, and I think it's made people smarter. Like people know more about the game. They think more in terms of like from a predictive sense than like a lot of the beat writers do. A lot of the beat writers just give us like descriptive analysis, and fantasy football people want predictive analysis. So that's probably where the biggest divide is. And these beat writers that maybe get hammered with questions, wanting predictive advice. They're not predictors, they're not forecasters, whereas people that are trying to be good at fantasy football are trying to like predict the future, and that may be the thing that bothers the beat writers the most, because they're not good at predicting the future. And someone who has we've the lifeblood of rotoworld.com has been our player news blurbs, and the foundation for that is beat writer commentary. And a lot of times the beat writers will put in their predictions, and the predictions are wrong a lot. That's not, but again, we can't have that expectation of the beat writers that they're going to be good at predicting what is going to happen. So fantasy players also need to know that. Fantasy players, I think, need to just take everything with a big grain of salt. But in terms of the beat writers themselves, most beat writers love fantasy football. I mean, I get DMs every weekend from beat writers who play fantasy football. They're like, "Who should I start this week?" You know, and the vast majority of them play fantasy football themselves. They love fantasy football. They like to interact with people that are interested in fantasy football. They know how closely we cover the game. We care about every little player. I'm DMing a Saints beat writer about like Austin Carr, like, oh, how many, you think he's playing this week? And, just the depth of knowledge that, the microscope that fantasy football has brought about in terms of covering the sport, I think is something kind of special. But if people don't, if there are beat writers that don't want to cover this sport with a microscopic lens, then they may feel like they are falling behind, and they may start to lash out, and that may be what occurred here.
Yeah, no, I agree. It makes sense. It is tough to see those guys come out of an industry. You've made your weight in, I'm sure, and builds up a lot of credibility too with the people there, like you mentioned. So that is a frustrating thing to see. Alex, obviously, as a guy who has a different perspective on it, you're making your living in the sport. I mean, you're approaching it with a different worldview, obviously, than the beat writers who are traditionally more old school football guys who think, oh, I saw the line play and now they're gonna run for 1,000 yards this year, that type of stuff. How do you view that relationship, and how do you view your part in that dynamic?
Well, I think beat writers are great because, as fantasy fans, they give us a lot of the information the quickest. I think a lot of them, like Evan's saying, they're kind of old school. To me, it's like they're kind of relying on the eye test. And the thing is, these guys aren't like talent scouts. They're like just seeing the same stuff that we are in the games. So I think that leads to a lot of like false conclusions, where if you like go through the data and you analyze it, you can reach a lot more like effective kind of information and kind of avoid the recency bias that these guys tend to have.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that it is sort of an industry that does lend itself to that. And also, a bit of sanctimony. And I think that's frustrating because there are a lot of great beat writers out there who understand you are kind of serving both masters with the coverage of every minutia from these teams. So I think in general it would just be nice to see a more friendly relationship between all parts of the media. So we want to be friends, guys. Clarence Hill, Omar Kelly, whenever you want to jump on the contrary, give some hot takes, join me and Alex, and maybe Evan too. We can do that. Let's get on that. I think we can make it happen. One thing, Evan, you mentioned you wanted to do last week, and I think I want to open the floor to you right now to start it off. You want to mention pick Alex's brain a little, get inside the mind of the top DFS player in the world. So I'll give you the window every time we do this to ask Alex one question, maybe start a conversation there. What do you want to know from the brain of the top DFS player in the world this week, Evan?
Yeah. Do you read any articles or listen to any podcasts leading up to Sunday each week?
Yeah, definitely try to read as much as I can. But I'm more focused on the data. So like sometimes the main reason I read or listen to podcasts is to catch stuff that's not in like a box score or like a snap count. For example, like Jordan Matthews signing with the Eagles, potentially getting like more snaps this week. You can't get that by looking at like box scores. You got to be reading so that you don't make these errors that they'll cost you money.
Yeah, I think that does make a sense from your approach. And when you have as many numbers at your fingertips as Alex does, which are represented in some of the rankings that we have on the site and the ownership projections on Osmo.com, it can be hard to look away from that. But there is a helpful synergistic relationship to have. Alex, who would you say is your favorite of these guys who are out there that you've followed before? If you want to say Evan, we can just say that. I'll allow it.
Definitely Evan. I mean, he's the number one football guy in my opinion. So I also enjoy his hot take tweets. So it's very entertaining.
Speaking of, we do have one guy who is currently projected to be one of the highest owned plays on the slate, who, Evan, you just tweeted some stuff about, and I want to get into it up top because he's going to be top of mind for a lot of folks. We have Corey Clement, who is shaping up to be one of the highest owned running back plays. You mentioned that there are some local reports there from another good beat writer who's doing their job the best in helping out the overall ecosystem. What are you doing with Corey Clement this week, Evan, and why would you maybe consider fading him?
Yeah, he's a guy that, well, first of all, I've only made a cash lineup so far. And I did have him in my cash lineup. I'm trying to get him out of my cash lineup. There are good values this week, Latavius Murray, I think it is a great value. And I think that there are a bunch more at the running back position. But, first of all, he's likely, even with Jay Ajayi and Darren Sproles out, Corey Clement is likely to remain a part of a committee. The Eagles brought up Josh Adams from their practice squad. They have Wendell Smallwood, who isn't very good, but when Jay Ajayi missed half the game last week, like Wendell Smallwood was in there getting touches. It's not like they just gave everything to Corey Clement. They very much believe philosophically in using a 2 or 3 back rotation. So it was never going to be Corey Clement all the way. And Doug Peterson, even before Friday's practice, after which Corey Clement was listed as questionable with a quad injury, was asked by reporters, how do you plan to use Corey Clement? And he's like, not as a feature back. I mean, he's a big part of our special teams. You got to kind of like try to get yourself into the coach's head a little bit. I think when we're projecting usage, I would love to say, oh yeah, Corey Clement at home against the Colts, he's going to get 25 touches. I would love to say that, but it's unlikely based on the way that they historically have distributed backfield touches. And now he pops up as being limited on Friday, listed as questionable. All the beat writers say he should be good to go. And I expect him to be active for the game, but it's like, this is another flag. Like, we really should not expect a monster workload from Corey Clement this week.
Alex, how are you feeling about Corey Clement? Obviously looking at it with a more ownership and price-driven approach. The team total's pretty tasty there. What are you doing with him, Alex?
Yeah, definitely agree that the situation for the run game in Philadelphia looks pretty good. I agree with Evan that the main thing I was looking at is how the snaps were distributed last game, because Sproles and Ajayi were out of the game for a good part. And Smallwood did get a lot of the action. I think the back score watchers might be like, oh, Clement got like 20 fantasy points, but he only rushed 6 times. He got like 6 targets. That's the main thing. But I don't project him to get that many targets this coming week. So all in all, I think the price is really good, so he's a good value. But I like some of the other guys a lot better at running back. One of them that I have as the top value, taking into account projection, is Kareem Hunt. So I think if I'm going for a high-owned guy, I'll probably go for Hunt over Clement.
Interesting. Okay, let's talk more about Kareem Hunt too, because he is another guy who's projected to pick up some ownership. We'll circle back there and we talk more about San Francisco, Kansas City. Clement, I think, is an interesting play. I think obviously you're right. He's shown some good stuff. One thing to note about the targets, you mentioned the 6 targets he's gotten. Wentz has been a more aggressive downfield thrower according to NFL's next gen stats. Last year, he was the most aggressive quarterback in the league getting it downfield. To me, I don't mind playing Clement, but I would actually augment him with Ertz or Aguilar. Probably Ertz more so, though. I think Ertz is in a very good matchup. And there is a generally, I don't know if this is something Alex would believe in, but I know other places have mentioned before, there is a better running back tight end correlation than there is a running back wide receiver one. So I don't mind going with that guy there with Ertz and trusting him as a safety blanket for Wentz returning from that injury. Let's talk, since Alex mentioned San Francisco, Kansas City, it's another game that we are projecting to be one of the highest owned ones on the slate. Could be a track meet. 2 teams that run have allowed the most plays run against them in the NFL. Give us one contrarian take on this game, Evan. Obviously, there's a lot of options to go here, lots of places to look. What would you do to get off the beaten path with San Francisco and Kansas City?
I think I would, because George Kittle failed last week, and there are a number of reasons for that, and we can talk about them. But because he failed at a pretty high ownership percentage, I think that it's an interesting idea to go back to him. The Chiefs are not good on defense. Last week's game, like, the 49ers jumped out to a pretty significant lead. Well, first of all, they started off the game, and it looked like George Kittle was going to be like the featured guy in the passing game. Like, the announcers were even talking about it. He got like 3 early targets. He drew a defensive pass interference flag, but he wound up finishing with just 4 targets for the entire game because the 49ers wound up grabbing a big lead. They couldn't protect the passer. I mean, they gave up like 6 sacks to the Lions, and their running game really took off with Matt Breida and Alfred Morris, and particularly Matt Breida. I think that what did Garoppolo finish with? I think he had less than 30 attempts in the game. This game sets up to be like the total opposite for where Jimmy Garoppolo, I think his attempts should skyrocket as compared to last week. The Chiefs are scoring at a very, very efficient clip. We haven't even seen Patrick Mahomes play at a game at home yet in his career. And teams tend to play better at home, of course. And so I think that, the 49ers are going to have to really score points in this game. And Garoppolo's uh, his pass attempts are going to be elevated. And the Chiefs, they were hoping to get back Eric Berry, who's been great against tight ends over the years, but he's out again. So I think that George Kittle is an interesting guy who's going to be much lesser owned than last week. I wanted to ask Alex specifically about Kareem Hunt. The spot looks great to me, but he has 2 targets through 2 games and 1 reception. So is that something that bothers you?
Yeah, definitely. But as far as projecting that onto the next week, I'm still taking into account a lot of like last year's data. So I haven't projected for like a modest number of targets, but I just think taking into account the team total and how many rushes he's likely to get, I still think he is going to be a great value, especially because he's priced so low on the sites. He's only 6K on DraftKings, which seems way too low for being like the main back and like the highest scoring team of the week.
And one thing I wanted to note is that the 49ers have given up a ton of catches to running backs so far. That can be sometimes a characteristic of these zone defenses, especially the cover 3 defenses like in Atlanta. Every year over the last 3 years, they've given up the most receptions to running backs. And Robert Saleh and the 49ers are running a sort of a variation of that. Both Dan Quinn and Robert Saleh come from that Seattle cover 3 under Pete Carroll background. So, and again, we're dealing in 2 game sample sizes here, and the 49ers are getting back their stud linebacker, Reuben Foster. So there's definitely, but it shouldn't surprise anyone if even after just getting 1 catch in the first 2 games, Kareem Hunt gets like 4 catches this game. Like no one would be surprised by that.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And Kareem Hunt, again, is going to be projected to be one of the highest owned running backs according to our ownership projections at awesemo.com. So I think, I actually would have liked Hunt more if he weren't going to draw that much ownership. I think for me, the move, and I'm surprised he's not picking up more ownership thus far. Travis Kelce was amazing last week, obviously getting a ton of targets. They really corrected some of the mistakes of week 1 in which Mahomes didn't look his way a ton. And San Francisco has been really bad versus the tight end. According to Pro Football Outsiders, he's been the worst via DVOA. The San Francisco 49ers have, rather, to tight ends. They've given up 100% more production at the position than they should be. I think that I'm actually intrigued a little by Evan. I think your point about George Kittle made a lot of sense. I think a Kittle-Kelce stack, going both with those guys, obviously 2 tight ends tend to be a little lower owned. They're both guys who can break it downfield. We saw last week with Jesse James how the Kansas City defense does not defend tight ends well, particularly ones who can get out and run. And Kelce is just a target monster. He's getting more targets than anybody else on that side, but under 10% ownership. I think the tight ends might be the spot there to get off the beaten path a little.
This is a good springboard for me to ask Osimo a question. How much do you factor in the matchups themselves? Like, we could talk about 49ers. Hey, they've given up all these catches to running backs. Hey, the Chiefs are getting, or the 49ers are getting smashed by tight ends. How much does that matter to you?
I've always been a little skeptical about like certain positional like numbers because it's like there's so many factors in play. So one stat I've heard so many times in like streams is this team gives up like so many yards to like tight end, but like the context is so different from week to week. A lot of teams have like star tight ends, so if they play more of those teams, they're going to give them more yards. I just don't really see that stat in isolation being like particularly useful to kind of like guiding who you're going to pick.
So let's just take San Francisco, for example. Okay. They have faced Kyle Rudolph, probably like a top 10, top 12 tight end in terms of production. Why am I blanking on who they played in their first game? Or no, that's who they played in the first game. Why am I blanking on who
and
they
it was
played
Jesse
last?
James last week.
They played. Well, the 49ers played
Oh
the
my bad. Yeah,
Lions last week.
yeah. Sorry. Yeah, you're right.
49ers played the Lions last week, and I think Michael Roberts scored a touchdown, but I don't think anybody else for the Lions did anything. So they did face, in week one, actually Kyle Rudolph scored a touchdown. He didn't do anything else besides that. So they've given up 2 touchdowns to tight ends in 2 games, really haven't given up many catches and yards to tight ends, but their DVOA against tight ends may look bad, I guess, just because they're giving up these big plays to tight ends. So that's a good point to keep everything in proper context. Hey, if a team starts out, and on the flip side, if a team starts out facing friggin' Rob Gronkowski in the first game and Travis Kelce in the second game, they're much more likely to give up production to that position than if they're facing like the Texans, who barely use their tight ends, and another team that barely uses their tight ends. I think that's a really good point.
Yeah, exactly. I think the distribution of how targets are distributed between running back, tight end, and wide receiver is like so different between different teams that I think it makes a big difference. So you gotta kind of take that stat another level and make it more advanced, kind of account for that factor if you're going to use it.
Sports betting man in the chat. Obviously, we are keeping an eye on your live stream chat, guys. We appreciate all of you tuning in and participating. We're trying to work your guys' questions in as we go. But Sports Betting Man points out, it seems like Alex really respects the Vegas lines and team projected scoring. Obviously, Alex, that's something you kind of have beaten into our heads in general. But do you want to give the people who are new to the stream, in part because we have some of Evan's audience, some random people who are coming in, why do you kind of stick so adamantly to Vegas lines, and how do they define your process?
Well, I think the Vegas lines are very informative because there's so much money backing them. So it's not only like they're putting out this opinion, but they're like backing it with all their money. It doesn't necessarily tell the whole story because bets may not be placed based on probabilities. It could be fandom too. So yeah, take some of the bets that are a little bit lower volume with a grain of salt. Especially the NFL, I feel like there's more casual bettors, so lines may not be as efficient. But I do think they're like good enough to kind of give a good starting point for any sort of analysis.
Since you're talking about lines, we should go to another team who is projected to be another high-scoring matchup with New Orleans and Atlanta. Obviously, New Orleans struggled a little bit last week versus Cleveland. Atlanta has kind of played some up and down matchups. Matt Ryan looked back to normal. Guys, so let's go to Alex. Let's go to you first. Give me a contrarian take on this New Orleans-Atlanta game, in which we are currently projecting Julio Jones to have a ton of ownership.
Yeah, I think Julio Jones is a great play. The one caveat is that there's so much variance at wide receiver that even if he's the best wide receiver play, it still may be justifiable to fade him. Michael Thomas is actually 1K more than Julio on DraftKings. So I don't have him projected as well either. He's 9K on FanDuel. I think he's the second most expensive player. So I'm not. I also know he's pretty high owned, so I'm not as high on him just from a value standpoint. But obviously, if I'm stacking the game, like I might throw him in there.
Is there anything you would do if you were going to play Julio, or I guess if you were going to fade Julio, what would you do as a pivot move to get away from that or to augment that?
Well, one guy I like that's been kind of flying under the radar. I mean, you can go to any top tier wide receiver, but I think a couple that are always good pivots are Odell Beckham and DeAndre Hopkins. I feel like any week it's just so random, like which one's going to score the most. So as a one-off, I might take ownership into account a little bit more than another position.
Evan, how about you? We got projected 54 points almost in this game. What would you do with the New Orleans-Atlanta game to get some value out of it, but hopefully not be as chalky as some of the other lineups out there?
Yeah, Tevin Coleman stands out to me. 20 touches last week. He did lose 10 to Ito Smith, and I think that's going to drive some ownership away from Tevin Coleman. It doesn't seem like he's gotten a lot of buzz all week in the DFS, fantasy community. He's got monster big playability. The Saints are going to be without their starting nose tackle, Tyler Davison, and their middle linebacker, Manti Te'o. Neither are great players, but they're like key cogs in their run defense. And of course, Tevin Coleman plays friggin' running back. So that kind of stuff. I like to know that. So I think that is where I would go. I really like Drew Brees though as a play, but I think you have to stack him with Michael Thomas, and Michael Thomas is going to be so high owned. I guess you could play him with Kamara too, though. You could play Brees with Kamara, and we saw what happened last week. We talked about on last week's show about how the Falcons schematically, they're one of these defenses that like concedes catches to the running backs, and they lost Deion Jones, who is a guy that is, he's the driving force behind why they feel comfortable doing that, because he has so much speed and he can make tackles. Christian McCaffrey comes out and had 14 catches against the Falcons, and Alvin Kamara is very capable of doing similar things, and that's going to be evident on the tape to the coaches, right? So I think that Brees plus Kamara plus Tevin Coleman, I think, would be kind of an interesting little game stack.
Yeah, Kamara, we currently have projected to have a fair amount of ownership as well, despite him falling short a little last week and his price remaining the same. We are projecting a fair amount. Again, promo code contrary on osmo.com will get you all of the ownership projections we're discussing here. It's 1 week free with promo code contrary, so go check that out. Kamara currently projected for 20% ownership. I'll give that away for free because, God damn it, we care. To me, the move is going Julio and Kamara. I mean, I would hope Kamara may be a little bit lower owned just because I think the NFL casual fans in particular hate getting burned by a play like that. So I think, to me, for the reasons Evan mentioned, a lot of targets there. Also, Atlanta's defense giving up 5.2 yards per rush. It was something that they didn't really take advantage of with McCaffrey, just because that's not how they approach it on the Panthers. But if Kamara does get more touches, we obviously have seen him breaking a ton long before, and the pass game value. It's too much for me to avoid here in a high-scoring matchup. So that would be how I would differentiate. God.
I got one big hot take on this game. So I forgot to mention this. One of the most popular players of the week is Tyler Boyd by our ownership projections. But Mohamed Sanu is I have him about like the same share of targets as Boyd, except I project Matt Ryan to be a lot better than Andy Dalton. So I'm thinking Sanu at 2.5% ownership is a really great GPP pivot off of Boyd.
Interesting. I like that. I actually have a fair amount of Sanu, and I kind of talked myself out of it because I realized I was going to him too much. But he does make sense. We've seen it before. He's a pivot. People like Ridley. Ridley just scored a touchdown. I think Sanu is a part of that offense for years now, and a reliable part. And in a game like this where they need to win it, I think Sanu is the guy who could get some value there. Good call, boss.
Thanks. Yeah, I think that people are going over like this one. It's like in the past 2 games, Sanu has scored 3.5 and 5.8 DraftKings points. He got 8 targets across both games, so it's a little bit lower than you'd expect. But it's like the opposite of Boyd, where he saw a bunch of positive variance, essentially, at least from my perspective. Sanu has kind of been on the negative end, but there's a lot of variance in wide receiver. So I think that's one spot where you can leverage the ownership pretty well.
And one question, Evan, because I think you might have talked about it on Twitter, or at least people are assuming you would know. Winky Christ asking, does Evan think that Peyton is being truthful about Traquan Smith getting more touches this week? Traquan Smith, the guy the DFS community has been dying to break out, but he hasn't been there. Do you know anything about that, Evan?
Yeah, I mean, he can get more touches, but what does that really mean? Because they've got Michael Thomas, they've got Ted Ginn. They're saying that they've also been saying that Cameron Meredith could be active this week. They did lose Tommy Lee Lewis, who was a guy toward the end of their receiver rotation. So that would make sense for Traquan Smith to get, just to be out there more. But does that mean that we're going to be playing him in fantasy? I don't think so. Not yet. I mean, look, maybe he'll rip a big play in the game. He might, because he has that kind of ability. He did that multiple times in the preseason. But I don't think he's ready to go in fantasy quite yet.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Chad Stalker saying that I guess a little bit of a critique, but I'll give you kind of the rationale why. This is the third video for NFL this week I've watched on the Osmo channel. They're all covering the exact same games and players. I assume Chargers Rams will be next. We're on this particular show, we're covering these games at length because they are the chalky games, and we're trying to give you a different viewpoint of it. So that is sort of a deliberate design here. But actually, I do have an answer for your critique, Chad, and this next question, which I'll offer up to Evan first. Is there a game on the slate, Evan, that you feel like is getting completely overlooked that could end up shooting out and providing a ton of fantasy value?
Yeah, two of them. Cincinnati at Carolina. I expect to see some upward movement on that total. I think that there already might have been. The Panthers are without starting safety Denoris Searcy. Their number 2 cornerback, Dante Jackson out of LSU, a speed guy, skinny speed guy. He is questionable with a hamstring injury. They're still without Thomas Davis due to a suspension. They got no pressure at all on Matt Ryan last week. And then on the other side, the Bengals are without their best linebacker, Vontaze Burfict. And their offense looks hot right now. So I think that this game has some decent shootout potential. And, I like the Texans-Giants game, not because I think that like the Giants are going to have sustained success, because their offensive line just torpedoes the consistency of their offense, and that's always going to be the case. But Odell Beckham is a guy that I really, really like this week, and I love to hear that Alex likes him too. Mr. Tuttle on the Swolecast really liked him as well. All it takes is 2 plays for him, and that puts the Giants in position to finally score some points. And then I think that the Texans, this is their home opener. I mean, they opened with 2 games on the road. I think that we see their offense come together this week. The Giants have not been able to get any pressure on the quarterback, and Deshaun Watson was under heavy duress in each of his first 2 games. I think that with a cleaner pocket this week in the home opener, Will Fuller back, I think that we see Deshaun Watson have his best game through 3 weeks.
Alex, how about you? Any thoughts on either of those 2 games, or another game that you think might have some sneaky back and forth value?
Yeah. So in the Carolina-Cincinnati game, I like let's see. I have Cam Newton as like a pretty good value on both sites. The problem is going to be stacking him up. And then Houston, I have as a really good play from every perspective. So I like having Deshaun Watson, Lamar Miller, and then if you're stacking the game, you want to get Hopkins, and I could see like a Watson, Hopkins, Beckham stack kind of having some huge potential. I think the ownership's also going to be like pretty decent in that game. So my sneaky game of the week is actually Miami versus Oakland. I think that Ryan Tannehill is he hasn't gotten to pass the ball very much, but he's had success when he has passed. I think he had only 50 attempts in the past 2 weeks. But I think Oakland will be good enough that it'll challenge Miami's passing game. He had good results in his last year that he played in 2016. Devontae Parker is coming back, and he's cheap, so I like stacking him up with Parker. And then as a game stack, I like potentially having Amari Cooper or Jared Cook on the other side.
Interesting. I think for me, that Miami game, I'm really into Kenyon Drake in that one. So I guess we're going, I love going the opposite way of the guy who's made way more money than I will ever make in my life off of DFS. But I am going heavily with Kenyon Drake because I think Oakland's been really bad, has been pretty bad versus the rush for the most part. Actually, no, really bad. 5.7 yards per rush given up. Kenyon Drake still getting the work. I think people are a little afraid of him because of Frank Gore taking some of those touches and snaps still. But, with Drake getting 16 touches a game, his big play upside, Oakland being pretty bad defensively versus the rush, I think Drake is an interesting play there. Any thoughts on Drake, Evan? I feel like you've talked a little bit about him and the Gore split, and at least in the matchups column, you talked about more length.
Yeah, no, I like Drake a lot. I really like Jared Cook too. He's been getting a lot of air yards. He leads the Raiders in targets. The Dolphins were bad against tight ends all last year. They've been bad against tight ends so far this year. You know, you know, if we're talking about like cornerback matchups, the number one cornerback for the Dolphins, Xavier Howard, has been like a legit shutdown corner dating back to the middle of last season. And you know, if we can just get him on Amari Cooper, push a couple more targets into Jared Cook's direction in the middle of the field, I think that's a matchup that the Raiders can take advantage of.
It'd be nice to see more Cook after him not getting the love that he deserved last week.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. There was a good question in chat, which I just lost. You know what? Never mind. Yeah, so I'm with you on that. One defense that people are mentioning right now in the chat, who I think is a little interesting and very contrarian and very cheap, the Dallas defense, I think, is in an interesting spot versus Seattle. Do you guys have any love for that game at all? Obviously, Dallas running it back to me with Ezekiel Elliott, who's a little underpriced, and the Dallas defense could be a profitable spot. Not a lot of ownership on either of those right now, according to our projections. Any love for the Dallas defense or anybody in this Dallas-Seattle matchup, Alex?
So the main thing I think with Dallas defense, it's not really jumping out at me from a projection standpoint, but if they're cheap, you know, that could make sense. It looks like they're like a pretty decent value on DraftKings at 2.2K. I like Elliott as kind of under the radar alternative to some of the higher owned running backs. He hasn't had like a huge game yet, but he's been pretty solid. I mean, getting his normal workload. He's getting a ton of targets so far this year. So I definitely think that would be my play in the game.
Evan, any thoughts on this Dallas-Seattle matchup?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Dallas makes sense, you know, just like on a straight 1-for-1 basis, because the Seahawks have given up the most sacks in the NFL through 2 games. But keep in mind that Seattle is another team that played its first 2 games on the road. We know that they do not have a good offensive line, okay? The first game, friggin' Von Miller dominated, okay? And in the second game, Khalil Mack dominated. So, and now they're going back home where historically the Seahawks have played much, much better. And I think that Russell Wilson is a little bit interesting because no one's going to play him. And even in that first game at Denver, he wound up with a really big fantasy day. I mean, I think he was like the number 7 quarterback on the week. But I think that pairing him up with Tyler Lockett, who's playing in the slot, he is playing Doug Baldwin's position now. That makes some sense when they're going back home to face this. And I do like the Dallas defense. I think it's really underrated, and they're going to even get stronger because they're going to get David Irving back after his suspension. So I wouldn't discourage anyone from playing them. I mean, Russell Wilson like takes so many sacks and like he can throw a pick 6, and it can be a situation where like he has a big game and the defense that he's playing against has a big game. Like that's very much within the range of potential outcomes.
Yeah, I think to me, I didn't realize actually Dallas, we do have to be very highly owned. I assume more people were going to go to the Bears or Vikings, but I guess a lot of people taking the discount. So yeah, I think you're right then actually. If the defense is going to be highly owned, then going to Wilson makes a lot of sense at $6,000 and under 5% ownership. Obviously, we know his upside. Dallas has been getting a ton of pressure, an 11.4% sack rate, which obviously bodes well versus a Seattle D that is not stopping anyone on the pass rush. But Wilson can beat any, as Evan mentioned, any defense. And Dallas, even though they are better, they're not. I mean, I don't consider them an elite defense. I'm a Dallas fan, so I might be more hypercritical. But I think they've been getting pressure. I think they're in an interesting spot, but they should be able to get beaten by a talented quarterback who's not offensive coordinated by Brian Schottenheimer. Be the one caveat there. Let's see what. Let's talk about the Chargers and Rams game, since that is another popular matchup. Obviously, a lot of great plays there at running back, in particular with Todd Gurley and Melvin Gordon. And the Rams have one of the highest totals on the slate in this Battle of Los Angeles. What would you guys do here, Alex? What would you do to get a little less chalky with this Rams-Chargers game?
Well, I think Todd Gurley is kind of off my radar a little bit. He's 9,200 on DraftKings, which is absurdly expensive. He's a little bit better priced on FanDuel, so I'll have more like 9,300. so relatively less of the cap. The one play I like from this game is stacking up the game and getting Goff with a couple of the wide receivers. The ones I like the best are Kupp and Woods, and then maybe having Allen on the other side. I think that is a potentially good matchup or a game that could have a shootout potential. It's not like I'll get the ownership though. I think last time I looked, it was kind of on people's radar, and if that's the case, I don't really see much of an advantage there.
Yeah, the Chargers a little under-owned. I think people are respecting the Rams' defense according to our projections right now. But Gurley and Kupp expected to have some ownership. Kupp at a really great price as well. So I think that makes a lot of sense. Evan, anything you're doing with this game to kind of get a little taste of it while differentiating a little?
Yeah, Keenan Allen is a guy that I have written down. So I think that Travis Benjamin is going to be back for the Chargers, and that is going to kind of take away from some of the playing time for Tyrell Williams and Mike Williams. And those guys line up on the perimeter primarily. If you look at the construction of the Rams secondary, their perimeter cornerbacks, Aqib Talib and Marcus Peters, are like maybe the best duo in the NFL, and they've given up nothing through 2 games. Now they have faced, the Raiders and the Cardinals, who don't have very much on the outside. So again, let's keep it in context. But these guys are proven year over year, very good at their craft, and they play on the outside. And then on the inside, where Keenan Allen runs almost 60% of his routes, the Rams have a guy named Nickel Roby Coleman, who is 5'7" and 170 pounds. Now he has been able to get away with being that small because he's really good. He actually is really good. But now he's facing Keenan Allen at 6'2", 206, like a severe mismatch slot receiver. Not every big number one receiver in the NFL works in the slot, as much as Keenan Allen does. Most of them don't. So I think that there's a chance that, especially if the Rams do live up to that high scoring team total, and they have scored over 30 points in 10 of 18 games under Sean McVay. They're a tried and true, very legit high scoring offense. The Chargers are going to have to answer back. And I think that, those throws are going to go to Keenan Allen, Melvin Gordon, with a little bit of Austin Eckler mixed in.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And it's interesting that both you guys were in Allen. I feel like that hasn't been the case for many of our plays, but Allen, I do think does grade out as a player. Super interesting. Obviously, he can get peppered with targets. He can easily have like 15 receptions in this game if they do fall behind. It doesn't matter if they're 5 yards or 10 or whatever. But if he does get anywhere near the amount of targets that would come with the Rams blowing them out, it could be a very profitable matchup for Keenan Allen and maybe even Rivers. I don't know. I'm probably not playing Rivers on this slate, but it is a thought. Let's talk about the Chicago-Arizona game. A couple requests for some Jordan Howard takes. Chicago as a defense looks like it's in one of the best matchups of the week. Also a pretty affordable price. Obviously, pairing a running back with that would be nice. And maybe Arizona's due to be good. Probably not, but maybe. Any thoughts on this game, Evan? Chicago and Arizona.
Oh, man, this is an ugly one. Bears coming off a big primetime win on a short week, going out to Arizona. They kind of scare me as a team that might not meet expectations in this game. I mean, when I projected the game to be like 17-13, so I mean, from a matchup standpoint, like, the Bears defense looks freaking awesome. Jordan Howard looks really good. Allen Robinson's been getting a ton of targets. The Cardinals are not using Patrick Peterson to shadow number one receivers this year, and Allen Robinson's been playing in the slot a ton, so he's going to be away from Patrick Peterson. And then on the other side, like Larry Fitzgerald, the Bears have given up a lot of production so far in the slot. It was Tyler Lockett last week, and the week before that it was Randall Cobb, who had a monster week 1. And Larry Fitzgerald just projects for a lot of work because he really doesn't have much target competition in Arizona. I don't know. Alex, what do you think about a contrarian David Johnson play?
Yeah, I love the concept there. So on DraftKings, he's 7,200. On FanDuel, he's 8,200. I don't think he's as good a value as some of the other running backs this week. For instance, I'd much rather have Kareem Hunt at a lower price point. But yeah, he's contrarian, that's for sure. The one play I like in this game is well, I have two plays actually. One is actually going the other way and taking the Cardinals defense. I mean, Trubisky, uh, he's obviously air prone. So there's like a pretty good potential he'll throw some picks. And the Cardinals defense is only 2,400 on DraftKings. They're one of the lowest priced ones. The other play I like is Allen Robinson, just because he's seeing monster targets. He's only 5,400, so for the amount of volume I expect him to have, I think he's a great value.
Yeah, I think that's one thing which I would actually differentiate a little here. I think Chicago might blow Arizona out. I get the temptation to think it's a defensive matchup, but Nagy and Helfrich are not like offensive minds who I think are going to play games close to the vest if they can blow it out. I think they have a little bit of a Rams approach to kind of just smoking teams if they can. And again, we talked about Allen Robinson, who's getting a ton of targets. This Cardinals zone defense that they switched to has been pretty bad so far. And I think they're pretty beatable in a variety of ways. I think Howard's interesting. I think Robinson's interesting. I'm a little intrigued by maybe going as not. I will rue the day I say this on a public live stream. Little Bears onslaught maybe might be interesting to me with Howard, Robinson, and the defense, because I just think Arizona is very overmanned on both sides of the ball. And Chicago, I think, is legitimate good and can smoke teams if they have to with play design and talent.
Yeah, this is just a spot where I feel like I like the concept there, but you can kind of say that about any game. And the team total for Chicago is only like 21.75.
Yeah, it's not as high as it could be.
Yeah, so the problem is Jordan Howard is like 6,500 on DraftKings. So when you like kind of look at him next to all the other running backs this week, like Latavius Murray, Hunt, Kamara, it's just like you're digging pretty deep there.
I agree. Since we kind of covered most of the main games, let's go through, I guess, position by position. QBs. Let's talk about which guys you think are going to be highly owned, who you are running away from with some degree of I don't know, commitment, I guess. Who are you running away from? Who do you hate at QB this week, Evan?
Man, I don't think I have anyone. I don't know. I don't know, Alex. I'm going to throw it immediately to you.
Asking the tough questions here. Sorry, guys.
All right, I'm ready for this one. So I'm always thinking about who you can stack up with your QB. It looks like Cam Newton is projected to be 12.9% owned, good for like the second highest. I just don't think that's a very good GPP play because the problem you're going to have is Cam Newton, like a lot of his upside is rushing. The wide receivers on the team aren't very like appealing. And then Cincinnati also isn't like a great value aside from maybe Boyd. So that would be one guy. I just think it doesn't really make sense to me. Like he's a great play in isolation, but when you take into account like stacking, I just don't like it.
Interesting. I mean, Newton does have the rushing upside. Is that not something that you would hold value with? To me, like I think maybe some players would default to thinking, oh, Newton can rush for touchdowns, and he is getting 3 red zone rushes a game. But is that something that you think could be a little overvalued, Alex?
I think there's merit to that, but the problem is you're losing out in correlation. So what you really want is to have your quarterback do well and then have that carry over to the rest of your fantasy team by having like 1 or 2 receivers. I think if Cam Newton has like a 30-point game, there might be there might be a receiver that does well, but it's hard to like build as much correlation because a lot of his projection is kind of individual.
I think you play him with McCaffrey.
That's true.
Yeah. I think if you're going to play him in a tournament, you play him with McCaffrey. I'm going to go with Matt Ryan because just because I know he's going to be so high owned. Everyone's going to play Julio. I don't know. I don't feel great about it, but I'll say the Saints defense finally showed up. You know, they were a top 5 pass defense last year. Let's say they finally show up. and Matt Ryan disappoints a little bit, only throws for 315 yards and 1 touchdown and 1 interception. And the touchdown goes to your guys, Mohamed Sanu.
Oh, okay. I like that. Yeah, Ryan is in a good spot. He probably would be my pick, but I don't want to pick the same one as you. So I would actually go Drew Brees. I think he's in a good spot. I think they are going to pass it, but I do think the Falcons defense, despite some of the injury losses of Keanu Neal and who's the other guy? Whose name escapes me? Deion Jones. I think
Deion Jones, and they're also without Tack McKinley, who leads the team in sacks through 2 games, and Derek Shelby, a rotational defensive lineman who plays a lot of snaps. They are severely shorthanded, the Falcons defense right now.
Well, that doesn't make me feel good about picking Drew Brees to fade, but I'll stick with it. I think it's a Kamara game. I think they'll get there in other ways. Obviously, Kamara can get it through the pass game as well, but my hope would be maybe if you go off Brees and go Kamara, and he just has a great rushing day, which people aren't expecting. So that'd be the one pivot I would make. How about at running back, Alex? Who would you fade at running back who are projecting to have some ownership and some heat behind them?
All right. Let me pull up our ownership here. So I'll start with the guy I like as the pivot, which is Leonard Fournette. He's just really low priced on DraftKings. He's only 6,900. I mean, Jacksonville obviously runs the ball a ton. There might be some questions about his health, but I like him as a pivot from I feel like that's a huge discount. And when you're comparing him to guys like Gurley and Kamara, like obviously those guys are better plays, but are they really like 3K better? And the thing about Fournette is we only have him projected for 2.3% on DraftKings ownership. So, I mean, that's just like off everyone's radar. And I just feel like that could be one that really pays off.
I think that's interesting because no one's going to want to play him coming off the hamstring injury. Number 2, in the first game, like they were feeding him like crazy. He had 12 touches on 21 snaps in the first game. That was a third of the game. So he just from a touch to snap ratio, dude was on pace for like friggin' 36 touches in week 1. They're playing a weak team. I mean, they should be able to control this game. And if they, and put the ball in Leonard Fournette's belly just over and over and over again. Titans haven't been very good in run defense. It's going to come down to, will they like kind of be cautious with him? I don't know. I went back and looked last year at the 2 games when he was coming back from an injury because he missed some time with an ankle injury. And there were 2 games where he was returning and he had 21 and 19 touches. So that's not, it's not quite what you would hope for probably, but it's definitely not bad. And it shows that they're definitely like willing to, give him a sizable workload coming off the injury.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And Tannehill defense has been bad versus the pass and the rush. But Jacksonville, their offense is completely different with Fournette on the floor. I mean, it's weird to watch the 2 teams play, compare them week 1 to week 2, where that was a very open air offense last week versus the Patriots, perhaps by necessity too. But in this game, they don't need to do that. They don't need to pass to stick with Tennessee. So I think it makes a lot of sense to go to Fournette. For me, my fade is just fading Corey Clement. I think we outlined the reasons pretty heavily up front. I think the ownership is going to be there. Obviously, the price makes sense. I'll still have some of him, but there's enough logic there. I think Wentz being back, people are going to assume they're going to play it close to the vest, but Wentz and that offense and Doug Peterson and how he runs things has not played things close to the vest for the most part. I think Wentz is going to throw it a little more than people expect, and Clement might be a little more banged up than people realize, and that to me is a recipe to fade him. What about wide receivers? Who are we fading?
Let me bring up one more guy. Sorry. Sure. Because I want to get Alex's take on him because I think that he's going to end up being the highest owned RB of the week, and that's Latavius Murray. Can you justify not playing this dude? Or are you of the belief that you can always justify not playing a dude?
Well, the ownership's high enough, I suppose, but I'm not going to give that. That's a total cop-out answer. I just have him projected for a huge workload, and I mean, he's in the 5Ks, so to me, that's just like a good play. Like they're against Buffalo, so I mean that game flow is likely to feature a lot of running. and I haven't seen his ownership being like sky high. Let's see, what do you guys have it up on our ownership projections here?
Yeah, he is under 15% right now. Murray is.
Yeah, so that's not even we have a couple of running backs projected as higher owned. So I think that he's a great play, especially like him on FanDuel.
Yeah, I agree. And the correlation too with the Vikings defense is there. I mean, there's no reason. The one thing that worries me though is Minnesota is a team who can put up points in a variety of ways, and Diggs can just break a 5-yard slant for a touchdown. And that does worry me a little bit about Murray because you just don't need the touchdowns. But the odds of them being stopped inside the 5-yard line twice throughout the game and Murray just slamming it in seem pretty high. So I think even considering that potential game script break, it seems hard to me to fade Latavius Murray in any sort of format. What about wide receivers, Alex? Well, who are you either going to gravitate towards or completely fade who has some ownership?
Well, the guy that's on my radar to fade right now is Tyler, projected as the third highest owned wide receiver at 17.1. I just feel like this is a guy with a pretty long track record. I don't have much reason to believe that suddenly he's much more amazing than he was in the past. So I like fading him, especially because I have a couple of pivots lined up. I mentioned Mohamed Sanu, and also I really like Devontae Parker coming off the injury. Both of those guys are under 3% owned. So I think that gives you huge leverage on lineups with Boyd in them.
How about you, Evan? Anything at wide receiver you are avoiding that the public is probably going to be frothing themselves over?
Alex, just be careful on Devontae Parker, man. Just be careful, okay? I mean, they've been using 4 receivers so far, okay? Jakeem Grant, Albert Wilson, Danny Amendola, and their best receiver, Kenny Stills.
Yeah.
So now we add Devontae Parker into that mix, like just be careful. Don't go overboard, okay?
This is a contrarian pick.
Question,
there's definitely some reasons not to pick him.
Yeah. So I'm worried about the playing time. And it seemed like they kind of soured on him. Maybe they'll throw him in there and try to showcase him for a trade. I don't know. I've thought, well, just based on like beat writer opinions, and of course, as we discussed at the top, they're not necessarily predictive, but they have thought that they might try to trade Devontae Parker when he gets healthy. Maybe they'll shoot him out there for 40 snaps and he'll catch a couple of touchdowns. The guy, I guess I'm going to go with Julio. I mean,
tough fade.
I know, it's a really tough fade. It's scary. There was a week last year, that stood out. I think it was against Tampa Bay, and like the whole world was on Julio Jones. And I did not have enough of him. I did not play him in cash. I played him in tournaments, and that was the total bad approach. And I think that was a 3 touchdown game. It was at least 2, in like week 11 or something like that. But anyways, I'm just gonna hope that he doesn't score a touchdown. What they did last week, and if he goes like 6 for 94, without a touchdown, I think I'm in good shape. What they did last week is they got other guys involved. They got Austin Hooper involved. They got Calvin Ridley involved. They have Mohamed Sanu, who you guys like this week. He could get involved this week. He really hasn't been involved so far. And they've got 2 running backs that they're playing. So there are ways for Julio to just get like 6 for 94 without a touchdown. And that would help you if you're fading him. That would end up being a smart fade, I think.
I'll actually go on the other side of that game for my wide receiver fade. Michael Thomas, I think the price is just really high. I think he's a great player. I trust the Falcons to kind of be able to limit him more. And also, again, if I'm going fading Breeze at quarterback, might as well correlate my play and fade Thomas and hope that Kamara comes through. Or Ted Ginn, obviously, another player who can break things deep. I think there's more reason to fade Thomas than there is Jones, given the price difference. The players who are on each side, like the Falcons need Jones. The Saints don't necessarily need Michael Thomas. I think people are locking him in like they do. So that's sort of be my pivot play there. We're almost done for this week, but I guess before we go, I'll give you guys a blank slate, whatever you want to offer up. That's either a contrarian viewpoint, a chalky viewpoint. Give the people your best take that you have this week before we part ways. Evan, I'll let you go first since you are a gentleman and a guest.
I'm just going to ask Alex stuff.
Okay.
I'm going to ask him about, all right, so Jack Doyle is out for the Colts, okay? What do you think about Eric Ebron? Eric Ebron has gotten the end zone in each of the first 2 games. The opportunity looks pretty good here against Philadelphia. What are your general thoughts? You know, I think he's priced rather reasonably. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think all things considered, he's got to be considered the top, at least cash game play of the week at tight end. I mean, the value is there. I do like some other tight ends, like we were talking about Cook. I think he's a great play this week. And then at the high end, Kelce. But I think Ebron, the one thing that's scaring me off of him is we have him projected for the highest ownership at the position at 14.3%. So, I mean, that's it shows like everyone's recognizing his value, but it also means that when he has a huge game, you're going to be facing a lot of competition too.
And at the end of the day, like, he's still Eric friggin' Ebron. So, you know, if he gets like, you know, he can definitely fail. He can definitely disappoint. All right, I got one more for Alex. Tyler Eifert was a guy that didn't play a whole lot in the first week, but was decently productive on his snaps. You know, he has like a really bad injury history, and you know, they're trying to like use him very cautiously to try to keep him healthy. But then in the second game, which was last Thursday night against the Ravens, his playing time went way up. He didn't get much production, but his playing time went way up. And now he's coming off of like 3 extra days rest, you know, and being this like injury prone guy. And he's playing in this game that I think could go over the total. You want to fade Tyler Boyd, which, you know, I think that's fine, obviously. And so Tyler Eifert, I think is pretty interesting. I don't think anyone's going to play him. What would his ownership projection be?
Oh yeah, let's pull it up here. His ownership projection is only 1.3%. So yeah, he's definitely contrarian. The thing about Eifert that I like is he pulls in a lot more touchdowns compared to his yardage than other players. So if he does get a lot of targets, there's a good chance he's getting in the end zone. But I just don't have him projected for a ton of volume this week. I just took it into account, you know, both weeks. The thing is, he's only been targeted on 13.5% of pass plays so far this year. And that just makes that kind of volume, it makes it hard to play anyone regardless of position.
All right. And Alex, how about you? Any sort of thing you want to address before we call it a wrap on this week's On the Contrary?
Yeah, I think my best take of the week, my best contrarian take is picking Tannehill. I just feel like the reason he hasn't passed much is just because of game flow. And I think that with the price in consideration, I see a lot of potential there.
All right, and for me, it's Kenyon Drake. I think Kenyon Drake's in a great spot. I think I'm ready to go back to the end of last year, where he was just putting up numbers with nobody watching or caring. So I'm hoping that's the case. I don't want to go against your Ryan Tannehill pick so directly, Alex, but I am. Kenyon Drake has just been a dude who I fell in love with this week, and hoping I'll be the one who burns me, for being honest. Oh, George Kittle too. George Kittle. Let's all get back on the George Kittle train. That's another take I'll give. I'm excited to be a part of that again after he broke my heart last week. I'm an idiot who touches the stove twice. So I'll go back to George Kittle. And that's it for us this week, guys. Thanks for tuning in. Make sure to subscribe to the channel. You can become an Awesemo.com premium member by joining with promo code Contrary. You'll get 1 week free, all the ownership projections and rankings from Awesemo himself that we discussed, along with premium content. Promo code Contrary, 1 week free. And that's all for us. Thank you guys for watching. Any parting words, Evan or Alex?
Yeah, just thanks everyone for watching. Thanks, Evan, again. You definitely have some really great information, especially kind of stuff that might be under people's radars for fantasy, like defensive players being out. I think that can make a big difference.
There you go. So that's it for us. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you, Evan, for joining us again, and we'll see you guys again soon.